Hello. So here is a short video illustrating the use of the quasible environment with the goal of making a specialized agent. The objective for this little demonstration is to make a universal agent that will act as a storyteller who will write texts for you in styles that can be inspired by different storytellers from around the world. So we're going to name our agent, we'll call it Numaya and give it a nice little name. The prerequisite when you make a generative artificial intelligence agent is indeed to have expertise in a domain. So in this case, you need to have a list of storyteller styles that interest you. So I've prepared a small list of storyteller styles from different parts of the planet, let's say, and different orientations. So ancient Africa, for example the griots, West Africa, pre-Columbian America, Quipucamayok, and then ancient Asia and prehistoric Celtic Europe, the Druids, for example. So for each of these types of storytellers or tales, of course, you need a descriptive sheet that describes the expertise of that writing style. So I had descriptive sheets made that have 9 sections: general information, biographical elements, literary works, dominant themes and ideas, writing style, intellectual thought, legacy and influences, some excerpts, and a short summary. So you must, of course, have all this data concerning your agent's expertise, meaning the writing styles it must be able to use to write and generate little tales, and for each of these styles have enough information to characterize the expertise. So I'll give you an example. If we take the griots, well, here is the characteristic sheet for the griots. You have the general information, era, ancient Africa, oral tradition as a literary movement, and then lots of information, which is all the detailed information from the sheets that helps understand the writing style, typically the dominant themes and ideas: honor, genealogical lineage, social moral history, bravery, loyalty, piety. There you go, so you must, of course, have this sheet for the domain of expertise you have chosen. If not, well, you have to use AI as I did to get relevant information about the expertise. Once you have that, you will, well, in fact, write or create the descriptive sheet for the persona. So I'm going to show you how you can do it using the expert persona. So to use the expert persona, meaning a generative artificial intelligence expert that generates personas, you are going to ask it to give you the definition of a persona that has the expertise of a writer whose descriptive sheet is provided below. And there, you insert the descriptive sheet, for example for the griots, if you want it to generate a persona that is a storyteller in the style of the griots. I specified to my persona generator that the persona must actually be a writer persona that answers. It doesn't ask questions, it always answers. It always generates a text directly based on what it is given and decides what it wants to tell if it's not specific enough. I also tell it that the persona, this expert storyteller, must generate texts of short length, but never long, or medium, but never long. And it must always write in the language used by the user and failing that, in French. There you go, so I'll show you. So this whole prompt is in this text. You use the persona generator that was provided to you, which is accessible with the links that were provided. So here I am in my persona generator. I copied the text that allows me to ask it to make the persona for the griots, with the little note at the end there, and then it gives me its persona. There. So you are going to go into the tool and create a persona. Griot's persona. So I'll redo it for you from scratch. I take all the text from the persona generation request, I send it to my assistant. There, so I'm asking it to make a generative AI persona. I give it the characteristic sheet for the griots, and I ask it to pay attention to these 3 specific points. So it's going to generate the description of a persona for me that I will go and insert into my environment, which allows me to create specific personas that will be used later in the rest of the process that I'm going to illustrate for you today. So of course, the model used is a reasoning model. Here, we are using the Gemini 2.5 Pro model, and the question requires a lot of attention to many specific points. You have here the display of the reasoning which has not been hidden, which allows you to see the sequence of words that are generated, which are supposed to help it generate a higher quality final text for me. Another clarification, All this reasoning text that is generated is useful text, as I explained to you. It consumes tokens, since each word here will be paid for at the generation level. So of course, the better the quality, the higher the cost, and the more reasoning words that will be generated, the higher the cost will be. But in theory, you will be much happier with the result. And then it finished its reasoning, and it generates the persona definition for me. So I'm going to wait for it to finish, and I'm going to copy the entire content of this persona, which defines all its characteristics, which makes up its expertise in its ability to write tales of this type. I'm going to go paste them into the file I created in the quasible environment. There. I'm formatting it a bit for maintenance, to facilitate maintenance. There. So your step next is to test this persona to see its quality. So I go back, I return to your workspace. You see that I've created a persona. I am now going to create an agent. So this agent will be accessible if you make it public on the internet. I'm going to call it Numaya. And so this agent will execute a process, a workflow, a process of activities that you will define for it. So here, you create a new process, and we are going to create a simple process, since here we only have one step. So we select our Numaya process, and we are going to add a step where we will ask it to behave according to the expertise that was defined in the griot's persona. We are also going to, by clicking on the little settings wheel, select the model. We are going to take a reasoning model, so you can test with Gemini 2.5 Pro, DeepMind, etc., and do several tests to see which model generates results that you judge to be the best, according to your quality criteria. So here, I've created a work process that my agent will have to perform every time it's asked a question. This process has only one step for now, and this step is performed according to the profile, the griot's persona. I'll go to my public agent level. I can define the image there, send welcome messages, define default questions. For now, I'm not adding anything. And I can test this. This workflow, this little agent here, for example. Talk to me about the moon. So what will happen when I ask this question is this question is sent with the griot's persona expertise to Gemini 2.5 Pro. In other words, Gemini 2.5 Pro will understand that it must answer this question by leveraging the skills of the expert that was provided to it. And we can clearly see that's what it's doing. I have read from the living word. Listen, you who watch under the sleepless sky. Listen to the word that honors the star of secrets. I do not sing of the sun, that king of fire who reigns over the day and wearies with homages. No, I sing of the moon, etc. So we see here that we have made a storyteller that generates texts on subjects we ask of it, using an ancestral style. So let me remind you a bit of the objective of our little agent. It was to be an agent that whispers tales from different regions of the world and different periods of the world. We had defined 7 styles, and the first was the griot's. So we have just done the necessary work to have a persona that explains what it is to be a storyteller in the style of the griot's. And we have created an agent that can be used to ask questions. So you replicate this process until you have all the experts that were defined. So you have the griot's, as I just showed you, Berbers, Taoist storytellers, Aboriginals, Vedic bards, Druids, Quipucamayos. So of course I did all that beforehand, and I created this generic agent. But you see, we have a persona here that is an orchestrator. And so it is necessary, when you have an agent that must use several expertises, it is necessary to explain the orchestration logic for these expertises. So we are going to look at the content of this orchestrator, and we see that the most important thing is the orientation of the expertises. And so this orchestrator was generated by my assistant generator, but its objective is that it has a selection procedure. It's written here. If the query contains clues allowing association with one or more author profiles, then I build the set of candidates. Then I randomly select a unique profile. What does that mean? It means that here I have 7 storytellers of different orientations and styles. If I ask the question, talk to me about the moon, which style will it choose? Well this first sentence, this first logical constraint of work distribution, makes it look to see if it can find elements in the question that would make it lean more towards a druid or a griot, for example. If it finds nothing, then it will choose randomly. But if there is information that would allow it, for example, talk to me about the moon like a storyteller from ancient Africa, then at that point it will indeed choose the three styles that are griots, Berber storytellers and, born of time, the Aboriginals, who are storytellers from ancient Africa. And that's what I want my orchestrator to do. So that's what I wrote here, what I had written. And then I tell it, this is what I added here, that I want its output to be in a format where it first provides the text it generated with the persona's name. So the persona's name, a horizontal line, a text, then a small editorial note that provides a small historical and technical explanatory note on the author's style. And there, I just put the title that gives it the reference of the profiles to use in its orchestration. And I'm going to show you how I combine all this by going into the Numaya agent. So agent Numaya, which I finalized a bit, I made a little sentence. I put my logo, my icon, and then I put two basic questions, one English version, one French version. But the most interesting part, of course, is to look at the workflow. And so the workflow, you see that I put my orchestrator first, then all the storyteller styles, and I combined all these personas, and I chose DeepMind as the model, reasoning model, which will be used for the generation work. So what do you see? You see here that we have the union of these 8 personas. They are concatenated. That means that the first one is the orchestrator, and then we concatenated the 7 storytellers. This results in a fairly large text that contains an orchestration description followed by a style description. And everything is coherent because in my orchestration, I clearly indicate to it that I am also providing it with a set of styles. So now we are going to test it. We have Numaya here, Universal Storyteller, and we are going to ask it to tell us a story about the moon. And we won't specify anything else. Which means, what do we expect? We expect it to generate a text for us with a small explanatory note, but that it chooses one of the 7 storytellers freely. And there, it chose the Dreamtime cartographer. So another little text that is different from the griot style, as you can see, with a small editorial note that explains how this text is indeed faithful to the style of this storyteller. Now, we're going to ask it the same question. There and so there, I'm telling it. I'm giving it information about the style of tale I would like, and it's going to go look in its storytellers if it has a storyteller that is suited to this style, one or more, and it will choose one. So you saw that DeepMind is a little faster than Gemini. The result is not the same, and of course, here you must, depending on your domain, choose the model that is the best. So there, it chose the griot. We'll let it write, and then we'll ask it a question about ancient Asia. And so there we ask it to talk about the moon in an ancient Asia style, and it will have to choose between the Vedic bards and the Buddhist Taoist storytellers, since those are the only 2 profiles I gave it in that style. And so it chose Buddhist, Taoist. And there, a monk asked his disciple, "Why does the moon not drown in the sky?" The disciple, after 10 nights of silence, replied, "Because it drinks the sea in its dreams." There, and so we have succeeded in a few well-organized steps in creating... Wait, I'll go back to my agent. There it is. So we have succeeded in creating, by having the domain expertise, of course, we created a list of storytellers. We, for each storyteller, created a characteristic descriptive sheet for that type of author. We provided the persona generator with the request to create an author persona for us that is capable of writing in the style described in the descriptive sheet. We inserted these persona descriptions into a persona that we created with the tool. And we did that for the 7 storytellers that interested us. We created an orchestrator that explains the logic of using the expertises. And then we created an agent that follows a creation, a generation process. And this process is defined using the text of the orchestrator persona and all the personas, the expert storytellers in each of the styles. All these texts are texts that we concatenated, and we defined in the workflow the fact that we will send this text with the question that is asked to DeepMind. We put an icon, we published our public agent, and as a result, when we click on share, we can copy the link, and we can have access on the internet to our little storyteller who, well, to whom we can ask all these questions, and who will behave as best as possible according to what we gave it to generate tales in several languages, as you will normally see. Here, it's possible because that it speaks French. So we are going to test that. There. So it speaks French because we have not improved and ensured that the language used to ask the question is indeed the one used to generate the tale. So we are going to return to our orchestrator persona here. We are going to insist on the language here. So we tell it that the text and the descriptive sheet it must generate must be in the language, in the same language as the initial question. There. So we indicate this to it, and we will see if that's enough for it to write in English. So we return as we made the modification in the orchestrator, and the orchestrator is used by the workflow for Numaya. Here, orchestrator 1, everything is connected, we don't need to do anything. The modification will be picked up directly by the agent. So here, we are going to ask this little question again in a new query to our agent. We await its response. There. So it still doesn't speak English. We are typically in a case here where the constraints we want the agent to respect are difficult to control because they are drowned in a rather large text. So what we are going to do is we are going to add an additional step, a persona whose purpose is to select the correct language. So we're going to dictate to it. You are a specialist at determining the language in which a text must be generated. Period. You spot the first sentence, which represents the text that a user may have sent. Period. You determine the main language of this sentence. Period. You ensure that all texts that will be generated are in the indicated language, which you have determined as the main language of the question asked, chas. Period. There. And so, first technique, we try to make a persona that defines what we call determining a main language. There. We are going to return to the agent, to the workflow, and we are going to edit the workflow. And we are going to add this persona that selects the language. We put it at the end, and we return to the orchestrator persona so that it is well aware that it can use this language selection persona. To determine this language, you use the expertise provided in your context. There. We'll even give it the name of the expertise. Hop. There. So here, by doing this, we hope to be able to bring the reasoning model's attention to this language management, which is not obvious, because of course I can also use words in several languages in my question. So we are now going to return to run another test. Here is our assistant Numaya. We ask a new question. There. So if that doesn't work, we have two possible solutions. First, we can test another model that is stronger in its reasoning capacity and in its quality as an attention model. So we will test with Gemini afterward. There. So here, we're having a lot of trouble controlling DeepMind. So as I just told you, what we are going to do is we are going to try to change the model. Hop. We are going to see if that's enough for it to manage to understand this constraint within the set of all the constraints we've provided it. So you see, we still have the, oh yes, indeed, I hadn't saved, so it couldn't take my language selector into account, because I hadn't saved. So I save. Now I've done several things. Ultimately, I changed my language selector and I saved. So to be totally, let's say, rigorous, I'm going to put DeepMind back to check if my initial modification was enough. There. So now I really have my language selector, which is in the list of expertises, because I hadn't saved it, so it wasn't taken into account, which means it's normal that it didn't change the result. I'll start again. So now I'm still with DeepMind and with my language selector, which is now an additional expertise that I sent to DeepMind, hoping it manages to understand that it must write me a tale about there and there. It succeeded. So it gives the name of the storyteller, and then it writes me, well, it indeed writes me a text in this style, Dreamtime Cartographer, and this little editorial note in English. However, a possible potential improvement is to also put the author's names and the title of the editorial note section in English. And we will continue like this to test our workflow, our agent that tries to apply a certain number of expertises. Here we have 10 expertises to get the behavior we want. Next, what you can do is add factual knowledge, because here we have given expertise knowledge, qualities, properties that are applied when the expert works, their ability to write like a druid, for example, but we have not added factual knowledge. So, for example, we could search the internet for references of texts written by druids. So here, find me excerpts of texts written by druids. So we try to find a knowledge base here, a set of texts that we would like our agent to be able to leverage For example, to give some illustrations after the text note, coming from texts actually written by druids, for example. So we ask that of Gemini on the Gemini interface. Here, you see it selected 2.5 Pro, and then it determines a whole process with surely searching the internet to extend its context and manage to give me excerpts. Another technique to get your knowledge base is to go to Google and type excerpts of texts written by druids. There, druids and writing. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll print this text to get a PDF version. So apparently it can't print it. So we must find another source. It's possible these texts are protected. You must, of course, be very careful not to use texts that are protected by copyright. Okay, so we have our Gemini that was able to go find some excerpts. So we are going to print that as a PDF. Hop, we are going to select all of this. So there, it stopped here. We go into our quasible tool. We are going to create a new text document, and we'll put here Druid excerpts, and we paste the Druid excerpts. So what we are going to do is we are going to tell Numaya that it can leverage a context of factual information for its work, potentially. So we are going to, here, add in the agent. We are going to change the workflow. We are going to edit this workflow. Hop. And so this workflow, we are going to add a new context to its context, which is excerpts. So we'll only do it for the druids, but it would be necessary, of course, to do it for all the styles. And so we are going to select a set of documents. Here, you can select PDFs, texts, audio transcriptions, and so on. There. And we save our workflow. So now, what do we see clearly? We see that the agent will execute a one-step process where it has 10 expertises, and in addition, it can leverage data coming from a context. You must, of course, go and tell it how to leverage the data coming from the context. So we are going to go change the orchestrator, and we are going to tell it that we are adding a section to what it must generate. We ask it to add here a small list of excerpts, a small list of authentic excerpts in the style you chose if you find them in your context. If you do not find any in your context, if none are provided to you, you do not put any excerpts. So here, we indicate to it that it will, after the historical editorial note, provide a small list of authentic excerpts in the style it chose, if it finds any in its context. And if it doesn't find any, it puts nothing. There. So now we are going to go test our agent Numaya, and we are going to ask it, therefore, for a story about the moon told by a druid. Tell me a story about the moon told by a druid. In fact, we'll even ask it for just a story, told by a druid. So there, this question is sent with all the expertises, including the language one, and especially with that of the orchestrator, which will have to figure out that it needs to take the druid storyteller expertise and that it should add excerpts. And it determined the language, of course, here. There. And it provided me with excerpts from my knowledge base. So there, that was a complete demonstration. You were able to see an entire development engineering process for a specialized generative AI agent, for a particular domain, which is universal tales. You saw all the tools we had to use and mobilize. To do this work, of course, you need expertise yourself in the domain that interests you for your agent. Here, there is a little bit of expertise in this domain, and then, which is reflected in the list of storyteller choices and in the characteristics of the storytellers that were determined. Next, we had to improve the quality of our agent that we tested. First, ensure that it is indeed multilingual, and second, ensure that it can leverage knowledge bases made up of text documents, PDFs, or other things. There, so good luck with the use, and of generative AI in your activities.